Welcome to this deep dive, into the book of Hebrews. Yeah, we've got selections from chapters 1 through 13, and we're on a mission to kind of like uncover its core message about faith and perseverance. But here's the twist. We're going to explore how these ancient teachings might actually be relevant to your life today. Ready to jump in?
Absolutely. What's fascinating about Hebrews is that it starts with a bold declaration, the supremacy of Christ. Not just as a great teacher or prophet, but as the ultimate authority over all creation, even angels.
Now, I know some of you might be thinking, angels, isn't this a bit well biblical? But stay with me here. How does Hebrews make this case for Christ's supremacy? What kind of language does it use?
Hebrews uses incredibly vivid and powerful imagery. It describes Jesus as the effulgence of his glory, the very image of his substance, and the one who holds all things by the word of his power. These descriptions aren't just poetic flourishes. They're designed to evoke a sense of awe and wonder.
So it's not just saying Jesus is important, it's painting a picture of him as this cosmic, almost mind-blowing figure.
Exactly. And to solidify this idea, Hebrews even quotes Psalm 2.7, where God declares Jesus as his son. It's like a double confirmation of his divine authority.
So it's connecting back to the Old Testament, to the idea of a Messiah, a king in the line of David. But this king is also something more, something greater.
Yes. And it's this something more that leads us to another key theme in Hebrews, Jesus as the perfect high priest. Now, you might be wondering, what does a high priest have to do with anything today?
Yeah, to be honest, when I hear high priest, I picture someone in elaborate robes offering sacrifices in an ancient temple. Not exactly relatable to my Monday morning commute.
I hear you. But the role of the high priest was incredibly important in the Old Testament. They were the mediators between God and humanity, offering sacrifices for sins and interceding on behalf of the people.
Okay, so there's this idea of a bridge between us and God, someone who can represent us. But what makes Jesus a different kind of high priest?
Here's where it gets really interesting for us thousands of years later. Hebrews emphasizes that Jesus, being both fully God and fully human, uniquely understands our struggles. He's experienced life and all its messiness, its joys and sorrows, its temptations and triumphs.
So it's not just some distant deity who can't relate to our human experience. He's walked in our shoes, felt our pain, faced our fears.
Exactly. And because of that, he can offer us something no other high priest could: true compassion and grace. Hebrews 4.15 even says he can sympathize with our weaknesses because he was tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin.
That's a powerful thought, knowing that we can come to him with all our baggage, all our imperfections, and find not judgment, but understanding.
And that's just the beginning. Hebrews goes on to describe Jesus as being crowned with glory and honor despite suffering death. This imagery reinforces the idea that through his sacrifice, he achieved victory over death and the devil, paving the way for humanity to experience true freedom and salvation.
Okay, so we've got this picture of Jesus as the supreme authority, the compassionate high priest, the victor over death itself. That's a lot to unpack. But Hebrews doesn't just stop at praising Jesus. There's also a call to action, right?
Absolutely. Hebrews weaves this beautiful tapestry of challenges and encouragements, and one of the central threads is the call to persevere in our faith, especially when things get tough. And let's face it, life throws plenty of curveballs our way.
You're not kidding. So how does Hebrews address this need for perseverance? Does it offer practical advice or just tell us to suck it up?
It does both, actually. Chapter 3, for example, starts with a warning against hardening our hearts and falling away from God. It uses the example of the Israelites who wandered in the wilderness for 40 years because of their disobedience.
The classic cautionary tale. Even with all the promises and miracles, he still messed up. So it's a reminder that even with faith, we have to choose to stay connected to keep our hearts open.
Precisely. And it's not just about individual effort. Hebrews emphasizes the importance of community. Chapter 3.1213 encourages us to support each other, to offer encouragement and reminders to stay strong in faith. It's about journeying together, lifting each other up when we stumble.
So it's like having a running buddy for your spiritual journey, someone to keep you accountable and motivated. I like that. But what about this concept of entering God's rest that pops up in chapter 4? What does that even mean?
That's a great question. And it's a concept that can be incredibly relevant to our lives today, especially in a world that often feels chaotic and demanding.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for me. What is this rest and how do we enter it?
Think of it as a spiritual state of peace and completion, that we find through faith in Christ. It's not a physical place or a vacation from responsibility, but rather a release from striving, a deep trust in God's promises, and a sense of security in His presence.
So it's like an inner sanctuary we can carry with us, even amidst the storms of life.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And Hebrews uses some really powerful imagery to describe how we access this rest. Chapter 4.12 says God's word is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, capable of discerning our deepest thoughts and motivations.
So it's not just about reading words on a page. It's about letting those words penetrate our hearts, challenge our assumptions, and expose what's really going on inside us.
Exactly. It's a call to be honest with ourselves, to align our lives with God's truth, and to find that deep, abiding rest that comes from knowing we are truly seen and loved.
Wow, okay. So we've got this foundation of Christ's supremacy, the call to persevere, the invitation to enter God's rest. But then things take a bit of a turn, right? Hebrews introduces this mysterious figure named Melchizedek. Who is this guy, and why is he suddenly so important?
Melchizedek is one of the most intriguing figures in the Bible, and Hebrews really dives deep into his significance. He appears briefly in Genesis, blessing Abraham and receiving a tenth of his spoils, but in Hebrews he becomes a key figure foreshadowing Christ's eternal priesthood.
Okay, I'm sensing a but wait, there's more moment here. What is it about Melchizedek that makes him such a powerful symbol?
What's fascinating about Melchizedek is that he's described as both a king and a priest. He blesses Abraham, who is considered the father of faith, and Abraham even honors him with a tithe.
So there's already this sense of authority and spiritual power surrounding Melchizedek, even in the Old Testament. But how does this connect to Jesus?
Hebrews uses Melchizedek to point towards the unique and eternal nature of Christ's priesthood. You see, the traditional Levitical priesthood in the Old Testament was based on lineage, on being descended from Aaron. But Melchizedek's priesthood wasn't tied to any family line or earthly institution.
So it's hinting at something different, something that transcends the usual rules and hierarchies.
Exactly. Melchizedek's priesthood was based on a divine oath, making it unchangeable and eternally effective. And that's precisely what Hebrews emphasizes about Jesus' priesthood. It's not about earthly lineage or temporary rituals, but about a divine appointment, a permanent connection between God and humanity.
Okay, so Melchizedek is like this prototype, this foreshadowing of the kind of priest Jesus would be. A priest forever, not bound by the limitations of human tradition. That's a pretty radical concept even today.
It is. And this radical concept leads us to another major shift in Hebrews, the transition from the old Mosaic covenant to the new covenant established by Jesus.
All right, let's dive into that. What makes this new covenant so different, so better, as Hebrews puts it? What does it mean for us today? So we're talking about a new covenant, a new agreement between God and humanity. What does that mean for us, practically speaking?
Think of it this way. The old covenant, the one established through Moses, was all about external rules and rituals. It was about following the law to the letter, offering sacrifices to atone for sins. But the new covenant goes deeper. It's about an internal transformation, a change of heart.
So it's less about what we do on the outside and more about what's happening on the inside.
Exactly. Hebrews 8.10 describes this beautifully. The law of the new covenant is written on hearts, not on stone tablets. It's about God's grace working within us, shaping our desires and motivations.
So it's not about trying to be good enough, but about allowing God to work in us, to transform us from the inside out. That's a powerful concept. But how did this new covenant come about? What made it possible?
Hebrews paints a very vivid picture of how this new covenant was enacted. It describes Jesus entering the holy place in heaven, not with the blood of animals like in the old system, but with his own blood. This sacrifice once and for all secured eternal redemption for humanity.
That image of Jesus presenting his own blood is intense. It really drives home the depth of his commitment to us, the magnitude of his sacrifice.
It's a pivotal moment that changes everything. And this idea of sacrifice leads us right into another major theme in Hebrews, the power of faith.
Faith. That word gets thrown around a lot, but what does it actually mean in the context of Hebrews? Is it just about believing certain things, or is there more to it?
Hebrews takes a very practical approach to faith. Chapter 11, often called the Hall of Faith, isn't just a list of names. It's a showcase of what faith looks like in action. We see men and women from the Old Testament who faced incredible challenges, made difficult choices, and accomplished extraordinary things, all because of their unwavering trust in God.
So it's not just about believing in God, but about trusting him enough to act even when it's risky or doesn't make sense from a human perspective.
Yes. These figures, Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Moses, Rahab, they all stepped out in obedience even when they couldn't see the full picture. They were willing to sacrifice their comfort, their security, even their lives because they believed in God's promises.
It's like that famous definition of faith in Hebrews 11:1. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. It's about holding on to that belief, that trust, even when the evidence isn't immediately apparent.
Exactly. And that's a powerful message for us today, isn't it?
Mhm.
We all face situations where we have to choose to trust, to step out in faith, even when it feels uncertain or scary.
You're telling me. But Hebrews doesn't just leave us hanging with this abstract idea of faith. It connects it directly to our lives, urging us to run our own race of faith with endurance. I love that analogy of a race because it implies effort, perseverance, and keeping our eyes on the finish line.
It's a brilliant image, isn't it? And Hebrews offers some really practical advice for how to run this race well. It talks about looking to Jesus as our ultimate example, the one who endured the cross for the joy set before him.
So we have this ultimate role model, someone who shows us what it means to persevere even when facing unimaginable suffering. But Hebrews also mentions something else, something that might sound a little bit harsh at first, God's discipline.
Yes, and I think this is one of the most misunderstood aspects of faith. We often think of discipline as punishment, but Hebrews presents it as a sign of God's love, a way of shaping us into the people he created us to be.
So it's like a loving parent correcting a child not to hurt them, but to guide them toward growth and maturity.
That's a great analogy. It's about recognizing that challenges and difficulties are not necessarily punishments, but opportunities for refinement, for becoming stronger and more resilient. It's in those moments of struggle that our faith is often tested and strengthened.
So instead of asking, why me? We can ask, what is God teaching me through this? It's a perspective shift that can make all the difference. And speaking of perspective shifts, Hebrews ends chapter 12 with this incredible image of approaching Mount Zion, the heavenly city surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses.
What a powerful picture. It evokes this sense of being surrounded by a community of support, all those who have gone before us in faith, cheering us on as we run our own race.
It's like having this grandstand of spiritual champions reminding us that we're not alone in this journey. And that leads us to the final chapter of Hebrews, which shifts the focus to practical instructions for living out our faith.
Chapter 13 is like a collection of reminders and exhortations, covering everything from love and hospitality to contentment and perseverance.
It's almost like a bullet point list of how to live a life of faith. What are some of the key takeaways from this chapter?
One of the most prominent themes is the importance of love, continuing in brotherly love, showing hospitality to strangers, remembering those in prison as if you were imprisoned with them, and honoring marriage.
So it's about putting faith into action, demonstrating our love for God through our love for others, especially those who are often overlooked or marginalized.
Absolutely. And there's also a strong emphasis on obedience and submission to spiritual leaders. This might seem a bit out of touch with our modern sensibilities, but it's important to understand in the context of the early church, where strong leadership was essential for survival and growth.
So it's about recognizing the importance of spiritual authority and accountability within a community of faith.
Exactly. But it's not just about blind obedience. Hebrews also emphasizes personal responsibility, reminding us that each individual is ultimately accountable for their own actions and choices.
So it's about finding that balance between submission to authority and taking ownership of our own spiritual journey.
Yes, and it all comes back to that central message of looking to Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, as Hebrews 12:2 so beautifully puts it.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. What would you say are some of the key takeaways from this deep dive into Hebrews? What are the nuggets of wisdom that we can carry with us into our daily lives?
Yeah, for me, one of the most powerful takeaways is this idea that faith isn't just this passive belief system. It's a force that can move mountains. Like we see that throughout Hebrews in the stories of those who dared to trust God and saw incredible things happen.
Absolutely. Hebrews calls us to a faith that is active, a faith that compels us to step outside our comfort zones, to persevere through challenges, and to live out our beliefs in tangible ways.
And it's not just about individual heroics either. Hebrews really emphasizes the importance of community, of supporting each other on this journey of faith.
That's so crucial. We're not meant to go it alone. We need each other's encouragement, accountability, and reminders to stay the course. Speaking of reminders, the imagery in Hebrews is so rich and evocative. I'm thinking about that picture of Jesus entering heaven with his own blood, the hall of faith, showcasing those who lived by faith, and the vision of approaching Mount Zion with a great cloud of witnesses. These images aren't just there for decoration, right?
Definitely not. They're meant to stick with you, to inspire and motivate you in your own walk of faith.
Mm-hmm.
They remind us that we're part of something much bigger than ourselves, a story that's been unfolding for centuries.
Okay, so after all this, I'm curious, what stands out to you as the most significant aspect of Jesus' character or teaching presented in Hebrews? What really resonates with you personally?
Mm. For me, it's the emphasis on Jesus' accessibility and his deep understanding of human experience. He's not this distant, unrelatable deity sitting in judgment. He's the high priest who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin.
So we can come to him with our struggles, our doubts, our failures, knowing that he gets it, that he's walked a mile in our shoes.
Exactly. And that's what makes his sacrifice so profound and his grace so powerful. He doesn't offer empty platitudes or condemn us for our weaknesses. He meets us right where we are with compassion and understanding.
That's incredibly encouraging. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listener with? What's something they can ponder as they continue exploring Hebrews on their own?
I'd encourage you to think about this. Hebrews is all about going deeper. It's about moving beyond a superficial understanding of faith and grappling with its implications for your everyday life. So as you go about your week, ask yourself, what does it mean for me to have a high priest who understands my struggles? How can I tap into the power of faith to face my own challenges? And how can I be a source of encouragement and support to others on their journey?
Those are powerful questions. I know I'll be chewing on those myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Hebrews. We hope you've come away with a new appreciation for its message and how it can speak to your life today.
It's been a pleasure exploring these profound truths with you.
Until next time, keep diving deep.